She just watched him, the stubborn craftsman who still believed that a little light could fix a broken town. Maple Hollow wasn't supposed to look like this. Once a postcard-perfect town, now it looked forgotten. Half-decorated windows, empty shops, wreaths still in storage. The sawmill had closed in the spring. The holiday fund had dried up by autumn, and when the mayor announced that the Christmas festival was canceled, the town quietly stopped pretending to care. Then came Nora Hale. 30 years old, exhausted from a city that never slowed down, she had driven north looking for rest, not redemption. Her car broke down at the entrance to Maple Hollow, as if fate had decided that rest would come here. Grace's Inn, the only place still open that late in November, smelled like cinnamon and old stories. And that's where Nora learned, between sips of coffee and the hum of a broken heater, that Maple Hollow had given up on Christmas. "No tree lighting, no parade," said Grace, the innkeeper. "People just don't have the heart this year." Nora didn't say anything, but something in her chest ached. She had spent her career designing light for events, for cities, for people who could afford to glow, and now she was standing in a town that had forgotten how. The next morning, she saw him, Evan Brooks. He was repairing the porch steps with steady hands and a quiet focus that didn't need an audience. He wasn't fixing them for money. He was fixing them because things shouldn't stay broken. And in that small act, Nora saw something she hadn't seen in months: care without reward. By the second day, she was in the town square, staring at the giant spruce that once lit up every December. The branches were bare, its top snapped by last year's storm. Beside her, a few boxes of tangled lights sat like ghosts of better times. "You thinking about running?" Evan asked, walking up behind her. "No," Nora said, brushing snow off one of the boxes. "I'm thinking about staying, at least until this tree shines again." He looked at her, skeptical, almost amused. "That's a big promise." "It's Christmas," she said. "We're supposed to make impossible ones." And just like that, two strangers, a woman running from exhaustion and a man trying to save what was left of his home, began to rebuild Christmas from the ashes of disappointment. They didn't know that in 1 week, under that same half-lit tree, they'd find not just light, but love. Snow kept falling over Maple Hollow, as if the sky refused to stop hoping for something beautiful to happen. Every morning, Nora Hale walked across the square with a mug of coffee and a notebook in her hand. She wasn't a local, but in a place that small, it didn't take long before people started nodding to her as she passed. The woman who'd come to fix the lights. The stranger who still believed Christmas could happen. Evan Brooks was already at the tree when she arrived that first morning. His gloves were worn, his breath visible, his hands steady, the kind of hands that could repair anything except his own doubts. Beside him sat boxes of tangled lights, half-broken ornaments, and a stubborn generator that coughed more than it roared. "You're early," he said. "You're earlier," she replied. It became their routine. He worked with wood and wires. She worked with color and light. And somewhere in between, Maple Hollow began to glow again, not yet bright, but alive enough to remember how. Grace Whitaker, the innkeeper, watched them from her porch with the quiet satisfaction of someone who'd seen too many winters to mistake coincidence for fate. By the third day, she was delivering thermoses of cocoa and pretending it was just neighborly. By the fifth, she was telling anyone who'd listen that maybe, just maybe, Christmas wasn't canceled after all. Word spread the way warmth does, slowly, then all at once. The bakery reopened. The high school students volunteered to repaint the old wooden signs. And even the mayor, after a long week of silence, stopped by to say he admired the enthusiasm, which in Maple Hollow was practically a blessing. But hope, like electricity, is never free. The generator was dying, the budget was gone, and the deadline, Christmas Eve, was closing in. One evening, as twilight deepened and the wind whispered through the trees, Nora sat on the steps of the bandstand, hands wrapped around her knees. Evan was testing the last string of lights, his brow furrowed. "If this one goes," he muttered, "we're out of replacements." The bulbs flickered, once, twice, then stayed dark. He sighed, the kind of sigh that sounds like surrender. But Nora didn't flinch. She stood, brushed the snow from her coat, and looked up at the dark spruce. "Do you know what light really is?" she said softly. "Electricity?" he asked. "Memory," she answered. "It's what people see when they remember joy." He turned toward her, curious now. "And what if they've forgotten it?" "Then," she said, "we remind them." That night, Nora stayed awake in her small room at Grace's Inn, sketching plans by candlelight. A pattern of lanterns around the square. A string of paper stars for the children to paint. A handmade angel, crafted from leftover ribbon and copper wire. By dawn, the pages were filled with ideas. By noon, the town had volunteers. Maple Hollow came alive again, not with money, but with hands. The grocer donated crates of apples for wreaths. The carpenter lent his saws. Teenagers made paper snowflakes in the diner. And Nora, the woman who'd arrived by accident, became the quiet heartbeat of it all. Evan watched her with something between admiration and disbelief. He'd seen people give up easily. But this woman, who owed the town nothing, worked like she'd been born to save it. On the 7th day, as they tested the repaired generator, the square shimmered faintly with light for the first time in a year. It wasn't perfect. Half the bulbs were mismatched, and the tree leaned slightly to the left, but to everyone watching, it was more beautiful than any Christmas before. Children clapped, Grace cried, and Evan smiled. A small, quiet smile that reached places he hadn't touched in a long time. Nora looked at him, the snow swirling around them, the glow reflecting in his eyes. "Looks like we did it," she whispered. "No," he said. "You did." But she shook her head. "We did." That night, Maple Hollow slept beneath a faint golden haze, the kind that hums in the cold air long after the lights are switched off. And for the first time in years, the town dreamed in color again. But what neither Nora nor Evan knew was that the biggest test, the true miracle, was still ahead. Because on Christmas Eve, when the lights of Maple Hollow were supposed to shine brighter than ever before, the storm would come. The night before Christmas Eve arrived like a promise wrapped in quiet. Maple Hollow glowed again, every window, every shop front, every heart. Children ran through the square, their laughter echoing against the snow. The town that had almost forgotten Christmas was now alive with it. At the center stood the tree, tall, proud, and imperfectly perfect, a symbol of hands that had refused to give up. But nature, as always, has its own timing. By dusk, the first gusts came, sharp and heavy. Clouds rolled over the hills like a dark tide. And before the final rehearsal for the lighting ceremony could begin, the sky had turned the color of steel. Grace, standing on the inn's porch, felt it first. "That's not snow," she said quietly. "That's a storm." The wind howled through Maple Hollow, bending the decorations, scattering garlands and snapping ribbons from fences. The townspeople rushed to cover what they could, but within minutes, the cheerful square became chaos. Nora was at the tree when the first strand of lights fell. She caught it before it hit the ground, her gloves slick with melting snow. Evan ran toward her, his jacket open, his hair soaked, his face pale with worry. "We need to shut it all down," he shouted over the wind. "We can't," she yelled back. "If we lose power again, we might not get it back." "Then let it go. It's just a tree." "No," she said firmly. "It's hope." Lightning cracked in the distance. The air hummed with tension. He grabbed her arm. You can't fight the weather, Nora. She pulled away. Then I'll fight for the reason we started this. By the time the worst of it hit, the generator had failed again. The square went black. The decorations ripped free, tumbling like ghosts across the snow. People fled indoors one by one until only two figures remained under the dark sky, Nora and Evan. She knelt by the generator, fingers numb, hair whipping across her face. He stood beside her, torn between reason and something deeper. "You'll freeze," he said. "So will everyone's hope if this goes dark again." Her voice shook, but not from the cold. She pressed the ignition switch once more. Nothing. Twice. A flicker, then darkness again. She leaned back, defeated. The snow swirled around them, heavy and relentless. Then, through the storm, came a sound. Faint at first, then growing. Children's voices. Grace had gathered them inside the inn. They were singing, "Silent Night." Their voices carried through the wind like candlelight, fragile, trembling, but alive. And in that sound, something shifted. Evan looked down at Nora. She looked back at him. Neither spoke. He took a deep breath, crouched beside her, and placed his hands over hers on the ignition. "Let's try again," he whispered. Together they turned the switch. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, one by one, the bulbs began to glow. First a flicker, then a shimmer. Then, as if the entire town was exhaling at once, light. Golden, warm, defiant light. The storm didn't stop, but neither did they. They tied ribbons back, re-anchored ornaments, and lifted the star to the top of the tree with trembling hands. Around them, people emerged from their houses, drawn by the impossible sight of Maple Hollow shining in the middle of a blizzard. Someone started clapping, then another, then everyone. Evan turned to Nora, his face lit by the glow they'd built together. "You did it," he said softly. "We did it," she corrected, smiling through tears. The snow fell slower now, as if even the storm had decided to let them have this moment. And when the clock struck midnight, Maple Hollow's lights didn't just survive. They danced. 1,000 tiny suns against the night. Inside Grace's inn, cocoa steamed on the counter. Children pressed their noses to the glass. And for the first time in years, the entire town believed again. Out in the square, Evan slipped his hand into Nora's. Neither spoke. They didn't need to, because sometimes the miracle isn't in what you build. It's in who stays to build it with you. When morning came, the storm had passed, leaving behind a silence so pure it almost hummed. The streets of Maple Hollow were covered in white, thick, untouched snow that sparkled like powdered glass beneath the winter sun. The town square, once a battlefield of wind and chaos, now looked like a painting. Every branch of the great spruce glittered with frost, every ornament frozen mid-twinkle. And yet, somehow, impossibly, the lights were still on. They hadn't gone out all night. Grace was the first to step outside. She wrapped her shawl around her shoulders and looked up at the tree with wet eyes. Behind her, families began to appear one by one, sleepy, bundled in coats, holding mugs of coffee, whispering like churchgoers before a prayer. Then came Nora. Her boots crunched softly in the snow as she crossed the square, scarf trailing behind her like a red ribbon. Her cheeks were pink from the cold, but her eyes were bright, the kind of bright that comes after you've cried for the right reason. Evan was already there. He was sitting on the edge of the bandstand, hands clasped, head down. When he saw her, he smiled. Small, genuine, the kind of smile that said, "I didn't sleep, but I'm glad I didn't." "You're up early," she said, stepping closer. "Didn't feel like missing the view?" he replied. They stood side by side, watching as the children ran circles around the tree. The snowflakes drifted lazily now, soft and harmless, like a blessing instead of a warning. "You know," Nora said. "I've lit up some of the biggest trees in the country. New York, Chicago, even D.C. "And?" he asked. None of them ever looked like this. He turned to her, eyebrows raised. "Because of the lights?" She shook her head. "Because of the people." Around them, laughter spread like fire through the cold. The mayor gave an awkward little speech about resilience and community, but no one really listened. Everyone's eyes were on the tree, and on the two people who had brought it back to life. Grace nudged a few of the townsfolk. "Told you," she whispered. "Wasn't a coincidence." Someone started a song. "Have yourself a merry little Christmas." Voices joined in, shaky at first, then stronger. Evan looked at Nora again. There was something new in his eyes, something unguarded. "You heading back soon?" he asked. "Maybe," she said, "but maybe not just yet." That afternoon, they helped serve food at the inn. Kids ran around with candy canes, elders shared stories from decades past, and every corner of Maple Hollow seemed touched by light. Nora found herself laughing, really laughing, for the first time in a long while. And when Evan brushed a bit of snow from her hair, she didn't step back. The town had been rebuilt in a week. But her heart, it was just beginning. As evening fell again, the lights flickered gently to life across the square. Families gathered once more, and a hush fell as the final light, the star at the top of the tree, shimmered against the darkening sky. Evan looked at Nora. "You know," he said quietly, "last night I thought everything was over. And now I think it's just beginning." The camera would fade out here if this were a film. The lights glowing golden, the snow falling slow, two silhouettes beneath the tree they saved. But in Maple Hollow, Christmas never really ends. Because every year after that, someone would tell the story of the night the lights almost went out, and the two strangers who refused to let them. The morning after Christmas dawned soft and quiet. Her reflection in the glass looked tired, but in a different way now. Not the exhaustion of someone running, but the ache of someone who's finally found something worth staying for. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. An email. "Confirming your position for the New Year's project. Deadline Jan 3. Her old life, loud, fast, and relentlessly bright, was waiting for her. She turned off the phone and sat on the edge of the bed. The kind of morning that feels like an exhale, after the music fades, after the lights dim, after the story ends. Maple Hollow looked peaceful under its blanket of snow. The square was empty now, except for a few stray ribbons tangled around the lampposts, and footprints already half erased by fresh flakes. For the first time in days, the town was still. Nora Hale stood by the window of her room at Grace's Inn, looking out at the empty street. Downstairs, she could hear the faint sound of Grace humming along with the radio, the clatter of plates, the slow rhythm of normal life returning. It should have been enough. She'd done what she came to do. The lights were shining. The people were smiling. The town was whole again. But Nora couldn't shake the feeling that she was leaving something unfinished. Later that afternoon, she walked through the square one last time. The snow was falling in lazy spirals. The generator hummed softly beside the bandstand, stubborn as ever. Evan was there, of course, tightening bolts, fixing wires, pretending the festival wasn't over just so he'd have a reason to stay near the lights. "You're supposed to be resting," Nora said, stepping closer. "I don't rest easy," he replied, smiling faintly. "Never have." They stood there for a while, in the silence that only small towns know. Every word they didn't say seemed to hang between them like the snow, too delicate to touch, too real to ignore. "You'll be leaving soon," he said finally. "Tomorrow," she answered. It felt like she'd just said something heavier than the truth. "Big city waiting for you, huh? Something like that? You'll forget about this place in a week." "You really think so?" You'd be surprised how easy it is to forget peace when the world starts shouting again. She looked at him, eyes soft. And you? You'll stay here fixing things forever? Some things need fixing more than once, he said. People, for example. That night, Nora couldn't sleep. The inn creaked with the sound of the wind, and the glow from the tree outside cast long shadows across her walls. She opened her notebook, the same one she'd used to sketch the light patterns. And on the last page, she began to write. Not a plan this time, not a diagram, a letter. Dear Evan, you once said this town forgot how to hope. Maybe you were right, but I think hope isn't something you remember. It's something you rebuild, like a light after a storm. I came here to rest. Instead, I found something worth staying awake for. Thank you for teaching me that small places can hold big hearts. If I ever forget, I hope this light reminds me. Nora. She folded the letter carefully and slipped it under the inn's front door before dawn. By the time the sun rose, she was gone. Hours later, Evan found it. He wasn't looking for it. He'd come to fix the porch railing that had cracked in the storm. But when he saw her handwriting, he stopped. He read the letter once, then twice. Then, without really thinking, he walked straight to the square. The tree stood there, quiet and proud, dusted in gold from the morning light. Beneath it, the star, the same one she had rebuilt with copper wire and stubborn hope, glowed faintly in the snow. He smiled, the kind of smile that hurts before it heals. Then he looked up and froze. There, hanging from one of the lower branches, was something new. A paper lantern, small and fragile, swaying in the wind. He recognized it immediately. It was one of the designs from her notebook. But this one was different, hand-painted, carefully sealed. Across its side, in silver paint, it read, "Some lights never go out." Inside it, a folded note, the same handwriting. "If you ever light this, you'll find me." Evan closed his eyes, the weight of her words sinking deep. Some lights never go out. He didn't know what she meant exactly, whether it was a promise or a goodbye or both. But as the snow began to fall again, he felt something inside him shift. Maybe hope wasn't just rebuilt. Maybe it was meant to be shared. He pocketed the note, turned toward Grace's inn, and whispered to no one in particular. Then I guess I'd better keep it burning. The days after Christmas passed quietly in Maple Hollow. The laughter faded, the decorations slowly came down, and life settled back into its gentle rhythm. But for Evan Brooks, the silence felt heavier than before. He still worked on small repairs around town, the cracked church steps, the frozen pipes at the bakery, the old benches in the park. But every time he passed the tree in the square, his chest tightened. Because hanging from one of its branches, still swaying faintly in the wind, was the paper lantern, the one she'd left behind. Some lights never go out. He'd read those words so many times they'd stopped being letters. They'd become a heartbeat. One morning, as he was repairing the window at Grace's inn, Grace herself appeared behind him with 2 mugs of coffee. She didn't say anything at first, just handed him the cup and watched him work. After a moment, she said quietly, "You're still thinking about her, aren't you?" He smiled, but it wasn't a denial. "Seems like the town isn't the only thing she fixed." Grace sat down on the porch step. "Do you know what I think?" "You're going to tell me anyway." "I think people like her don't leave to disappear. They leave to be found." Evan looked out at the snow-covered road leading out of Maple Hollow, the same road she'd taken. He thought about the letter, the promise, the light she'd left behind. And for the first time in a long while, he knew exactly what he had to do. That evening, he locked the workshop early. Inside, he gathered every leftover light, every bulb that still worked, every scrap of copper and wire from the festival. He worked through the night, the way a man does when he's chasing more than sleep, when he's trying to build something that might outlast regret. The generator hummed softly in the corner, its faint glow illuminating his hands. On the workbench lay the lantern. He opened it carefully, studied its fragile paper sides, and whispered, "If I ever light this, you'll find me." He smiled. "All right, Nora. Let's see if you meant it." The next morning, New Year's Eve, Maple Hollow woke to the sound of hammering and laughter in the square. Evan had gathered volunteers again, though no one quite knew what he was building. Grace watched from the inn, smiling to herself as the townspeople carried ladders, boards, and bundles of lights. By noon, a wooden archway stood at the entrance to the square. By evening, it was wrapped in garlands and lined with hundreds of lanterns, each one painted by a child, a family, a friend. Each one lit with a small golden bulb, and right at the center, hanging higher than the rest, was her lantern, the one with silver letters. Some lights never go out. When the sun set, the town gathered around. The air was cold enough to make breath visible, but hearts were warm. Evan stood before the crowd, nervous in a way that had nothing to do with the weather. "This isn't another Christmas," he began. "It's something we built together, something that shouldn't have existed but does, because people believed long enough to make it real." He paused, eyes scanning the crowd, and then the horizon. "Someone once told me light isn't electricity. It's memory. It's what people see when they remember joy." He took a deep breath, the words catching just slightly. "So tonight, we light this town not to celebrate what's past, but to remember what found us when everything went dark." Then he reached up and pulled the cord. The square exploded in gold. Lanterns lit one after another, spilling warm light across the snow, up the walls, into the sky. The entire town glowed like a constellation reborn. Children gasped, couples held hands, and Grace whispered something like a prayer. Evan stepped back, his eyes on the central lantern. It swayed gently, shimmering in the wind, alive again. And then something strange happened. At the edge of the square, a car engine turned off. Doors opened. Footsteps crunched on the snow. Evan turned and froze. She was there. Nora Hale. Her hair tousled from the wind, her eyes reflecting the golden light, her breath catching as she looked up at what he'd built. No one moved. For a moment, it felt like even the snow had stopped falling. "You lit it," she whispered. "You told me to," he said softly. She stepped closer, the crowd fading into a blur behind them. "You built all this?" "We did," he said. "You started it. I just finished the sentence." Her smile trembled, half joy, half disbelief. "I wasn't sure you'd light it. I wasn't sure you'd come back." They stood there, inches apart, the world glowing around them. The lanterns above them flickered gently, as if the lights themselves were holding their breath. Nora reached up, brushing a snowflake from his coat sleeve. "You know," she said softly, "in the city we plan light shows months in advance. And how do they compare?" "They don't," she whispered. He smiled. "So, what now?" "Now," she said, taking his hand, "we build something that doesn't end with Christmas." The crowd erupted in cheers as the clock struck midnight. Fireworks burst behind the tree, painting the night in color. And in the glow of 1,000 lights, the ones they built together, two people finally found what they didn't know they'd been missing all along. A year had passed since the night Maple Hollow glowed brighter than it ever had before. Seasons had come and gone, the lilacs of spring, the warm hum of summer, the quiet rustle of autumn leaves. But the memory of that winter had never faded. If you walked into town now, you wouldn't recognize it. The bakery had new windows and a line out the door every morning. The inn had been freshly painted, with wreaths still hanging in July because Grace said it felt wrong to take them down. Children laughed in the square again, and at night, the same tree, the one that once stood dark and broken, now glittered with permanent lights, powered by a brand new generator Evan built with donations from half the town. They called it the Miracle Tree. But everyone knew who the real miracle was. Nora Hale didn't leave again. After that New Year's night, she'd stayed, at first just for a week, then another, then until spring. By the time the flowers bloomed, Maple Hollow had already stopped calling her the woman from the city. Now she was simply Nora. She opened a small design studio above the old hardware shop, Hale and Light Co. Her first project? Helping small towns across the region plan their own Christmas festivals. Her second? Helping Evan turn his repair shop into a community workspace where people could learn, build, and dream together. That December, as the first snow began to fall again, the town prepared for the anniversary celebration, the Christmas we built 1 year later. Posters went up weeks in advance. Tourists started arriving early, and by Christmas Eve, the population of Maple Hollow had nearly doubled. But even with all the attention, the lights, the music, the press, the heart of it all was still the same. 2 people, standing beneath the tree, hand in hand. The night of the festival, the square was alive once more. Ribbons strung across lampposts, music drifting from the bandstand, laughter spilling into the cold. Evan stood near the tree, adjusting the star at the top just like he always did. Nora watched him, shaking her head with a grin. "You know," she said, "you could let someone else do that for once." "And risk it being crooked?" he said, pretending to frown. Perfectionist. Builder. They smiled, the kind of easy smile that comes from knowing someone's rhythm as well as your own. As the countdown began for the tree lighting, Grace took the microphone again, her voice still trembling the way it had a year before, but this time with joy. "1 year ago tonight," she said, "this town stood in darkness. We thought we'd lost more than a generator. We'd lost hope. But someone, 2 someones, reminded us that sometimes all it takes to find light again is to believe in each other." The crowd applauded. Nora leaned her head against Evan's shoulder. "She makes it sound like we saved the world," Nora whispered. "We saved ours," Evan said simply. Then the switch was flipped. The square erupted in gold. The tree blazed to life, brighter than ever, not from perfection, but from love woven into every bulb and wire. The children screamed with joy, snowflakes glittered like confetti, and music swelled as if the heavens themselves were celebrating. In that moment, Maple Hollow wasn't just a town, it was a heartbeat. Later that night, when the crowd had thinned and the lights shimmered softly in the snow, Evan and Nora walked to the edge of the square. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something wrapped in red ribbon. "What's this?" she asked. "Something I've been meaning to give you." She opened it carefully and gasped. It was the paper lantern. The very same one she'd made that first Christmas. Restored, framed in glass, glowing faintly from within. Across its side, the same words gleamed. "Some lights never go out." Her eyes welled. "You kept it." "We built everything else," he said softly. "I figured we should keep the first light too." She looked up at him, snow falling gently between them. "You know, if this were a movie, this would be where we kiss. Then let's not disappoint the audience." And under the same tree where hope had been reborn, they did. From that year on, every Christmas Eve, the people of Maple Hollow lit their lanterns, one for every home, every family, every memory. The light spread through the streets like a living thing, golden and endless. And though time moved on, as it always does, no one ever forgot that first Christmas, the one they built together. And maybe that's the real miracle of Christmas, that even after the lights fade, the warmth stays. If this story touched your heart, let us know in the comments below. Tell us what you felt, what you believe in, and what kind of love you still wait for. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Love Under the Lights, where every week another story reminds us that love still glows brightest when the world feels cold. Merry Christmas, wherever you are.